Students, in today's class, we are going to study a new lesson from Blossoms, and the name of the lesson is Someone, which is a poem written by Walter John de la Mare. Now, this poem is about a day in which the poet hears the ringing of his doorbell, and on opening the door, he finds no one. He goes through a feeling of confusion as to who had rung the doorbell. It can be inferred that the knocking of the door is symbolic of the call of nature. Now, let us read about the poet Walter John de la Mare. So, Walter John de la Mare was an English poet, short story writer, and novelist. De la Mare was born in Kent at 83 Marion Road, Charlton. He is probably best remembered for his works for children and for his poem The Listeners. He was educated at St. Paul's Cathedral School. He was born to James Edward de la Mare, who was a principal at the Bank of England, and Lucy Sophia Browning, daughter of Scottish naval surgeon and author Dr. Colin Arrott Browning. So Walter worked from 1890 in the statistics department of the London office of Standard Oil for 18 years to support his family, but nevertheless found time to write. De la Mare suffered from a coronary thrombosis in the year 1947 and died of another in 1956. He spent his final year mostly bedridden. His ashes are buried in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral, where he had once been a choir boy. Now, here you have the summary of this poem. So, let's have a look at it. Now, in this poem, Someone, it is night time and the narrator is inside his home. Perhaps it is a cozy small home, since the door is said to be wee, meaning very small. So the door is said to be wee, which means very small. And from here we can guess that the home of the narrator was a cozy and small home. The speaker is absolutely sure that he heard a knocking. But when he opens the door, looking all around, he could see no one who might have been knocking. There is no stirring, meaning movement. Nothing seemed to be moving around in the darkness outside. So when the speaker opened the door, he could see nobody. And there was no movement. Everything was calm and still. However, the narrator could hear the sound of the beetles that live in the walls of his home, and the owl outside in the forest trees hooting. So he could only hear the sound of the beetles and the hooting of the owl. He could also hear the sound of the cricket whistling in the night. These sounds do not approximate what he has heard, and he is left wondering what he just experienced. The poem concludes with the speaker restating that he has no idea who it was that knocked on his door. So finally, we see that the poet is unable to find out who it was that knocked on his door. Right? So this question remains unsolved in the poem. Now let's read the poem. Someone. Someone came knocking at my wee small door. So the poet says that someone came knocking at his small door. So the poet lived in a house which had a very small door, as I have mentioned earlier also. So it was night time, and the poet heard a knocking at the door. Someone came knocking. I am sure. I listened. I opened. So the poet says that he was definitely sure that there must be someone who knocked at his small door, because he heard the sound of the knocking. So, as soon as he heard the sound of the knocking, he opened the door to see who it was. I looked to left and right, but not there was a stirring in the still dark night. So after he opened the door, he saw nobody. Then he looked to left and right, but he could see no one who might have been knocking. So he saw nobody at all, right? There was no stirring. So I have told you all that stirring means movement. Okay? So there was no movement of anything. Nothing seemed to be moving around in the darkness outside. So we already know that it was night time and it was fully dark outside, right? So the speaker says that the night was still and dark. So he saw no one outside after he opened the door. He looked to left and right, but he could find nobody. Only the busy beetle tapping in the wall. So he heard the sound of certain animals and insects, right? So he says that he heard the sound of the beetles that lived in the walls of his home. Only from the forest the screech owls call. So he could also hear the hooting of the owl that was coming from the forest. Only the cricket whistling while the dewdrops fall. So he also heard the sound of the cricket, which was whistling while the dewdrops fell. Now, what are crickets, students? Crickets are insects which have mainly cylindrical bodies, round heads, and long antennae. They are related to bush crickets and more distantly to grasshoppers. Okay, so basically crickets are insects having cylindrical bodies, round heads and long antennae. So he heard the sound of the cricket which was whistling while the dewdrops fell. So I know not who came knocking at all, at all, at all. So in the last two lines of the poem, the speaker restates, which means he mentions again that he has no clue or idea as who it was that knocked on the door. But he is sure that he heard the sound of the knocking. But even at the end of the poem, he could not find a concrete answer to who it was knocking. Right? Now here we have questions. 1. What was the speaker sure of? 2. What did the speaker do after he heard the knocking on the door? 3. What was tapping in the wall? Part B of the same question. What could the poet hear from the forest? Question number 4. How can we understand that the speaker did not live in a grand house? So I have already told this to you while I was explaining the poem. So I hope you can find out this answer. It's a bit tricky, but if you read the summary of the poem very well, you can easily find out the answer. Okay? And question number 5. What does the poet restate at the end of the poem? Okay? So these are the 5 questions which I have given from this poem, Someone. Next, complete the following sentences with information from the text. 1. Someone came knocking at dash. 2. I listened, I opened dash. 3. Only the busy beetle dash. 4. The poet heard the screech owl's call from dash. And number 5. The poet did not know dash. So students, read the poem very carefully and also the summary of the poem which I have given over here, and then solve these two exercises on your own. Thank you.